Hello, my name's Louise McNeill, and my paper's on pervasive surveillance during a global pandemic. How privacy rights are being fortified as governments implement digital mass surveillance techniques and controls. Surveillance techniques span history going back over 5,000 years, with the establishment of castles to watch over cities and trade routes. Our entrenched history of surveillance has shaped the way we perceive and manage problems in the modern world, often disproportionately reinforcing and intensifying the impacts of surveillance and controls placed upon marginalised groups. The intensification of surveillance techniques often occurs in order to provide security for the established elite and protect commercial interests above the interests of marginalised groups within society. And we now live in a digitised world where each action, transaction and social media reaction creates a digital footprint to track and trace every move. As severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, or COVID, sweeps the globe and the world tries to grapple with managing a novel virus, new methods of digital surveillance and controls are being implemented on global populations. We have witnessed an increase of state-led surveillance, and government controls have come starkly back into the conversation. During these times of difficulty and uncertainty, the drive towards increased levels of surveillance and social monitoring becomes pivotal in controlling the spread of disease. Yet it also raises serious human rights questions. New digital tracking platforms record sensitive personal health data and intimate aspects of our everyday lives, leading us to new levels of state-led mass surveillance. As governments strive to strike a balance between controls and freedoms, surveillance and privacy rights, economic security and health, the handling of the pandemic has highlighted a struggle where economic interests are pitted against the health of nations. In addition, questions have been raised about the new levels of state controls and disproportionate impact on society. Nations across the world have altered social structures, legislations and immigration or travel rules to protect against the virus, and surveillance applications to track and trace individuals have been quickly developed and rolled out around the world. In Ireland, as with many other countries, there was a state-led drive to persuade the public to adopt the new technology in order to protect themselves and their loved ones, although some countries took a more mandatory approach to enforcing the tracking updates. However, the hasty introduction of new tracking applications around the world was problematic. Some applications had glitches and issues. Others were highly criticised for their invasive impact on human rights and privacy. There's also been a significant concerns raised against the use of databases which store all the track and trace data in a centralised government data bank, raising questions about the future uses of that data. The UK centralised track and trace application was designed to store user information for 20 years if the user tested positive, and for 5 years if the user was a close contact. This received significant criticism, as it was unclear why the information would be required for such a long time. Between issues with the system, user distrust and negative criticisms regarding privacy rights, the UK eventually moved to a decentralised system hosted by a collaboration between Apple and Google. Due to the volume of sensitive data that surveillance tracing applications need to obtain, advocates and privacy researchers have recommended decentralised track and trace systems to enable individuals to be socially responsible during the pandemic while attempting to protect their privacy from government overreach. While some states have tried to reassure the public that their privacy will be maintained, others have taken a more overt, firmer or mandatory approach to the use of tracking devices. After the discovery of the virus, China's unrelenting surveillance networks once again drew attention, as telecommunications providers sent through data lists of individuals travelling across restricted regions, which was tracked through their personal phone GPS. China has also embarked on a new form of social control through an application called the Alipay Health Code. All citizens are required to download the tracking system, and local police can routinely stop citizens to check they have it. The application determines an individual risk level and provides them with a coloured QR code, which is presented for access to public spaces and public transport services. This raises concerns regarding social sorting and social controls, and the potential for consequences to reach far beyond managing populations during the pandemic. The general migration of overt state-led forms of surveillance to silent, pervasive, covert digital surveillance significantly alters the power dynamics, resulting in a more effective social control mechanism. While the approaches have varied vastly around the world, there is no disputing that most countries have had to take some form of action and alter or increase their surveillance levels in an attempt to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. The figures currently show 223 countries affected, with over 2.5 million confirmed deaths and over 116 million confirmed cases. Governments around the world are struggling precariously in their attempts to balance the negative consequences of managing the virus. There are serious repercussions for mental health services resulting from increased levels of demand as people are suffering from isolation and fear. Also, managing the continuation of mental health services and containment of the virus for those with pre-existing mental health conditions becomes even more difficult, as they're often already subjected to varying levels of isolation and exclusion. In addition, governments are attempting to mitigate the significant economic impacts, which have undoubtedly affected less affluent areas more dramatically and might further increase the poverty and inequality gaps. Those earning higher incomes tend to have the opportunity to work from home, suffering less financial consequences, while lower income households have tended to be on the front line of essential retail services, and as a result they've been subjected to higher levels of risk and greater financial impacts with job losses or furloughing. There have also been shifts in power, with many world leaders passing emergency legislation that significantly alters the power dynamics of the state. This is particularly evident in Hungary, where the emergency legislation was passed allowing the government and Prime Minister to rule by indefinite decree. Other countries have also taken steps towards shifting the balance of power, including the British government, attempting to effectively move towards disenfranchising elected ministers. They have been accused of using the pandemic to enact emergency legislation and erode parliamentary sovereignty, make a power grab, flout the rule of law, and impair human rights. Israel has also taken drastic surveillance steps as they tapped into their security agency's covert collection of phone records. Chile's president enacted new powers under a state of emergency, which allowed the military to enforce curfews in a bid to contain COVID. In addition, Bolivia's now former president was accused of trying to cling on to power by using the pandemic as a reason to postpone the elections for a second time. The pandemic has facilitated emergency actions that have allowed leaders to move towards a power grab and increase levels of mass surveillance with little or no resistance. We have yet to see the full effect of this change in power dynamics across the world, and as the pandemic continues to surge, executive powers and mass surveillance continues to be utilised in the name of control and safety. The challenges of COVID have resulted in unprecedented levels of surveillance and social controls, and Human Rights Watch have raised concerns over abuses of power as countries around the world violate rights relating to free speech and peaceful assembly. In addition, the potential for harvesting digital data for commercial gain, misuse and abuse remains high, and as a result, organisations like Privacy International are acting as watchdogs to protect privacy rights in the aftermath of the pandemic. However, it would be naive to suggest that alterations in power dynamics and increased levels of surveillance or digital surveillance are not required to control the pandemic. It's clear from episodes in history that in times of plague, drastic actions and increased levels of surveillance have been needed to contain the spread. In order to mitigate a novel virus that is yet to be fully understood, governments need to move towards social controls to contain populations, and dissent needs to be managed. This acts as a buffer while science seeks to find solutions and to understand how the virus works through monitoring and surveillance. The surveillance capacity of our socially networked lives has proven beneficial in terms of understanding and tracing the pandemic, with evidence that COVID hotspots follow patterns replicated in Facebook's social networks, providing some predictability for outbreaks. Mobile phones provide a unique capacity to trace, monitor, and provide evidence to develop prediction models based on social group interactions. It is currently within our interests as a society to utilise this surveillance data to our benefit, informing effective models for communicable diseases. Technological advancements in surveillance techniques have undeniably provided us with frameworks that can alleviate the spread of diseases. In addition, the occurrence of COVID has provided the unique opportunity for governments around the world to try new methods of surveillance and develop programs aimed at the containment of future disease. Digital mass surveillance systems, supported by high-functioning and high-volume surveillance technologies, have the ability to forensically identify individuals. However, in this digital age, it's also important that changes in the levels of surveillance are specifically utilised purely for the purpose of mitigating the pandemic. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.